The night I noticed the scent, I was folding towels. Lavender detergent, faintly damp cotton, the kind of domestic peace that makes you forget what year it is. The shirt was his, crisp, pressed, white as forgiveness. But beneath the starch and fabric softener, something lingered. Something floral, unfamiliar, expensive. I didn't recognize the brand, but I recognized the message. You can always tell when something doesn't belong to you. For a moment, I just stood there with the shirt in my hands, my heart beating like it was trying to escape. I wasn't young anymore, but humiliation doesn't age. It still burns, still chokes. The realization came not as lightning, but as a slow, invasive rot. I placed the shirt back on the hanger and told myself stories. Maybe he hugged someone goodbye. Maybe she sprayed perfume too generously. Maybe I'm imagining things. But the scent remained. It followed me like a shadow through the house we built together. The house used to feel warm. His laughter used to fill the kitchen. The chairs, the curtains, the very walls felt like they recognized me. Now, every object looked at me like a witness afraid to speak. I went to bed before him that night. My hands trembled as I set my glasses on the nightstand. When the mattress dipped with his weight, I pretended to be asleep. His phone buzzed against the wooden nightstand. I heard the faint, practiced shuffle, the way a man moves when he thinks his wife is deafened by age or sleep. My heart pounded, but I didn't turn. I just listened. One message tone, a short laugh, the sound of something saved, not deleted. People imagine betrayal as a violent act, a slammed door, a broken dish, shouting. But it's much smaller than that. It's silence held long enough to bruise. The next morning, I made him breakfast. Eggs, perfectly scrambled. Toast with marmalade. He kissed my cheek absently. His phone vibrated on the counter, screen face down. Reflexively, he covered it with his hand. I saw it, and he saw me see it. A moment too quick, but it was enough. I smiled. "You're working too hard again," I said. He smiled back. His eyes didn't. I used to think love meant believing in the best of someone. Now I realize it's the easiest way to become their accomplice. The day stretched on with that knowledge coiled beneath my ribs like a living thing. I washed dishes. I dusted shelves. I ironed shirts. Every act of care felt like setting the table for my own funeral. At 4 in the afternoon, I stood in the hallway, staring at our wedding photo. I looked younger, brighter. My hand rested on his arm, proud, devoted. The woman in the photo believed in forever. The woman staring at it knew better. It hit me that I had spent decades perfecting invisibility. I made myself small to keep the peace. I smiled when interrupted. I apologized for things I didn't do. I lived in service of comfort, his comfort. Now I wondered, if I disappeared entirely, would he even notice? That question kept me company through dinner. He talked about a new project, about travel, about the board's decision to increase dividends. I nodded when required. I let him talk. I watched his mouth move, the way liars practice sincerity. Later, when he showered, I walked into his study. His phone was charging on the desk. The wallpaper was a picture of us, years old. He hadn't changed it. But that wasn't sentimentality. That was camouflage. I looked around the study. Everything was meticulously arranged. Pens aligned, invoices stacked, drawers labeled. Control masquerading as order. I opened the top drawer. Receipts, bank slips, travel itineraries. Nothing damning yet. Still, a pattern began to form. Dates that didn't match. Dinners that never existed. The language of betrayal is written in the fine print. When the shower stopped, I closed the drawer quietly and returned to the kitchen. I stood by the sink until the water dried on my hands. He came out in his robe, humming, smelling of soap. "Long day?" he asked, his voice soft, polite, the voice of a man who assumes you'll die before he does. "Yes," I said. "Long." That night, I dreamed of the sea. I was walking along a shoreline littered with letters. All of them were addressed to me, but I couldn't open a single one. Each envelope dissolved into foam before I could read it. When I woke, I knew something inside me had shifted. I wasn't angry. Not yet. Anger requires energy, and I had been drained too long. What I felt was closer to recognition. The kind that hurts because it's overdue. At breakfast, I poured his coffee. I watched the steam rise between us like a veil. He said he'd be late tonight, another meeting. I nodded. Of course. After he left, I sat in his chair. I stared at the empty cup he'd left behind. There, on the rim, was a faint smudge of lipstick. Not mine. I pressed my finger against it, tracing the curve. Perfect. Deliberate. Proof. For a long moment, I simply sat there, breathing. Then I laughed, quietly at first. Not from madness, but clarity. The kind of laughter that sounds like a door unlocking. I thought of all the times I'd stayed silent. All the times I'd chosen dignity over truth. All the years I'd convinced myself that endurance was noble. I picked up my pen and wrote a note to myself on a scrap of paper. He doesn't deserve your ruin. I read it again, folded it, and slipped it into my blouse pocket like a talisman. Outside, the afternoon light glowed soft and forgiving. The world hadn't ended. It had only started telling me the truth. I didn't know it yet, but the quiet ruin was only the beginning. Beneath the silence, something inside me was learning to speak again. Perfume fades quickly, but deceit lingers. That evening, when he returned from one of his meetings, the smell reached me before he did. Heady, floral, foreign. Not mine. Not ours. It filled the hallway like a stranger's breath in my ear. I pretended not to notice. That's what years of marriage teach you. How to fold silence into small, polite smiles. He dropped his jacket on the chair. I picked it up. Careful, deliberate. My hands didn't tremble this time. I hung it in the closet and closed the door, sealing the scent inside like a crime scene. Dinner passed in fragments, his voice, the clink of silverware, the hollow rhythm of routine. I nodded, made small comments, laughed where I was supposed to. Beneath the table, I pressed my nails into my palm until I could feel my pulse. It was the only proof I was still alive. After he went to bed, I sat at the dining table in the dark. The house hummed faintly, refrigerator, clock, pipes, all the noises that fill the gaps between words. That's when I noticed the study door slightly ajar. He was careless now, comfortable. He believed invisibility had made me harmless. Inside, the air smelled of printer ink and ego. His desk lamp was still on, illuminating an array of papers arranged in precise stacks. My husband was nothing if not orderly in his deceit. I didn't intend to snoop. But curiosity, when married to humiliation, becomes survival. The folder was labeled Estate Revision, Private. I hesitated for a heartbeat, then opened it. At first, the words blurred, paragraphs of sterile legalese, lines of bequeathments and stipulations. My eyes adjusted slowly, skimming over terms that had once comforted me. Spouse, beneficiary, executor. Then I found it. My name crossed out, in neat, impersonal ink, replaced by another. Her name, not his mistress's, of course. No, she was smarter than that. It was masked beneath the name of a foundation, one I recognized only because I'd written the checks that kept it running. A charitable front, registered under her maiden name. It wasn't just betrayal, it was theft disguised as generosity. I read every line, every clause. His signature sprawled across the bottom, dated only a week ago. The lawyer's name was familiar, someone from his golf club, a man who shook my hand at dinner parties and called me darling. I felt a strange calm then, the kind that comes right before a storm. He had counted on my ignorance. 40 years beside him, and he still didn't understand the woman who balanced every ledger, tracked every account, reconciled every decimal. I had built his empire while he took the bows, and now he had quietly erased me from it. I didn't cry. Not this time. Tears are for people who still hope. Instead, I took notes. Literally. I wrote down the date, the lawyer's firm, the line numbers of every clause that concerned me. My penmanship was steady. My mind, sharper than it had been in years. As I read deeper, something curious emerged. The will was incomplete. It referenced amendments that weren't attached. A missing addendum. That meant there was another version, hidden, perhaps, or waiting to be finalized. A chess player always keeps the queen safe until the endgame. I closed the folder carefully, replaced it in the exact position, and turned off the lamp. But before leaving, I noticed something else. A jewelry receipt on his desk. A diamond bracelet. Pricey. Purchased yesterday. Delivery to his office, not home. My fingers traced the printed address. The ink smudged slightly beneath my thumb. Ink bleeds, I thought. So will he. That night, I lay in bed beside him. His breathing was even, soft, practiced. The sound of a man without conscience. I studied his profile under the dim light. His jaw, his graying hair, his mouth slightly open. I wondered how many lies that mouth had spoken in the same tone. It once said, "I love you." He shifted in his sleep, muttering her name. Not fully, but enough. The syllables stuck to my skin like frost. At dawn, I woke before him. The sky outside was the color of spoiled milk. I brewed coffee, poured his cup first, then mine. When he entered the kitchen, he looked surprised to see me awake. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, stifling a yawn. I smiled. "Just thinking." He kissed my cheek absently, sat down, opened the paper. The ritual continued. I watched him read about markets and mergers and men like him who always won. When he left, I exhaled slowly, then went to work. Not domestic work, real work. The kind I had abandoned years ago for his comfort. I opened my laptop and began searching. Property records, foundation registrations, tax filings. His name appeared in more places than I imagined. But her name hid beneath the surface like mold beneath wallpaper. Every transaction told a story. Quiet embezzlements disguised as donations. Funds moved through shells. I recognized the accountant's name. One I'd met at a charity gala, the same night he introduced her as an associate. My memory sharpened with every click. The smell of her perfume seemed to linger in the room, taunting me. I wondered if she knew the scent would cling even after the love faded. Maybe that was the point. A mark of territory. I spent hours tracing their network. Each connection was a thread, and by noon, I had woven a noose. Then I printed everything. Each page came out warm, smelling faintly of ink and inevitability. I laid them on the table like a map of my own resurrection. At 3 p.m, the phone rang. His name flashed on the screen. I let it ring until it stopped. Then again, and again. Finally, a text. "Board dinner tonight. Don't wait up." I typed a single reply, of course. When the house was quiet again, I went to his study one last time. I opened the folder, inserted a photocopy of the will's front page, with a small, neat note in my handwriting. "You forgot who taught you arithmetic." Then I closed it. By the time he came home, I was in bed, the lights off. His footsteps were careful, hesitant. Maybe he noticed something was off. Maybe not. Men like him only recognize danger once it's already touching them. As I listened to him undress, I felt nothing. Not rage, not sorrow, just a cool detachment that felt almost holy. The kind of silence that follows a verdict. He climbed into bed, murmured goodnight, and drifted into dreams he didn't deserve. I turned to face the window. Outside, the world was dark, waiting. Tomorrow I would begin the rest of my life, one forged in ink, signatures, and truth. But tonight I would rest beside the man who had already buried me on paper, unaware that I'd started digging my way out. There's a freedom in being unseen. For most of my marriage, invisibility was an insult, a symptom of how small I had become to the man who once swore I was his world. But now, I began to see it as something else. A weapon, honed over decades of being ignored. He thought I was slipping, that my memory was softening, that I no longer had the energy to question anything. He mistook my silence for decay. But silence, I learned, was the perfect disguise. It hid thought. It hid intent. Every morning, I played my part. I poured his coffee. I smiled at the right moments. I nodded through the lies. Behind that smile, my mind worked like a ledger, recording every inconsistency. It began with the receipts. Small things, easy to miss. A dinner on a night he claimed to be traveling. A bouquet purchased on a Sunday morning when the florist near our house was closed. I started collecting them. Not by confrontation, never that. I simply folded them into my cookbook between pages of old recipes I no longer made. Next came the photocopies. He had left his study open again. Men like him grow lazy with habit, confident in their control. I used that carelessness. Each time he left the house, I slipped in, turned on the lamp, and began my quiet work. Bank statements, foundation records, emails printed and signed. I learned the rhythm of his corruption, the timing of transfers, the language of deceit. He used phrases like fiscal discretion and private beneficiaries. I wrote them all down. Words meant to sound righteous always hide, rot underneath. I created folders, plain manila, neatly labeled in my own handwriting. Charity, legal, private. Each one became a chapter in the story he never wanted told. By the end of the second week, I had a collection that could bankrupt him in reputation alone. But I wasn't ready yet. Not until I could watch them together. That opportunity came with the gala. Every year, he chaired the same charity fundraiser, an elegant evening dripping with hypocrisy and champagne. This year, his mistress had been named a special guest. Her name printed on the invitation, elegant and mocking. I RSVP'd immediately. He didn't expect that. The night of the gala, I dressed in silver. Not the loud, polished kind, soft silver, the color of moonlight on stone. I pinned my hair up, wore my mother's pearls. My hands trembled once, but only once as I fastened the clasp. When I arrived, I saw them before they saw me. She was younger, of course, pretty in a brittle way, like glassware meant for display, not use. Her laughter cut through the crowd, too loud for the setting. He stood beside her, smiling that diplomatic smile he used at board meetings and funerals. They didn't notice me. Not right away. I stood near the bar, a shadow among sequins, invisible as air. I watched how he touched her lower back when he thought no one was looking. How she angled her face toward him with the worship of someone still trying to believe in fairy tales. I almost pitied her. Almost. The speech began, and I drifted closer. I knew his script by heart: charity, community, compassion. All the words men like him use to launder their souls. The audience clapped at the right moments. I smiled too, small and sharp. When he stepped down from the podium, his eyes found me. Just for a moment, I watched the color drain from his face, the smile falter. A flicker of panic, quickly buried beneath performance. He approached me later, of course, in that practiced way of his. "I didn't know you'd be here," he said softly, as though speaking to a ghost. I tilted my head. "Oh, I've been everywhere, darling. You just never looked." His mistress hovered nearby, uncertain, her perfume heavy enough to choke. I turned to her and smiled. Lovely speech, wasn't it? I almost believed him myself. She laughed awkwardly, excused herself, and disappeared into the crowd. He leaned closer. "What are you doing?" I met his gaze and held it. Watching. He didn't ask what I meant. He didn't dare. Later that evening, I slipped into the catering hallway, the part of the hotel where the real work happened. I'd arranged for a friend, one of the event staff, to hand me copies of the donation ledgers, the so-called anonymous contributions that traced back to his accounts. All neat, all traceable. The records smelled faintly of ink and champagne. I folded them into my clutch and walked back into the ballroom as if nothing had happened. He spotted me again across the room. Our eyes met, and in that look he must have felt it, that shift, that sudden, silent realization that the power he thought was permanent had begun to erode. I left early while he was still shaking hands. The night air was cold and merciful. I took off my heels and walked barefoot to my car. The city hummed around me, indifferent and alive. For the first time in months, I felt weightless. At home, I laid everything on the dining table: receipts, ledgers, bank records. The evidence of years condensed into neat piles. I labeled them carefully, aligning the corners, pressing down each page, as though ironing out history itself. There was no need to rush. Revenge, I was learning, was an art of patience. A woman can spend a lifetime learning how to wait: children, appointments, dinners gone cold, and still never realize how powerful that waiting can become once she uses it against someone. The next morning, he asked if I'd slept well. I said yes. He asked if I was feeling all right. I said better than ever. And when he kissed me goodbye, I smiled as his lips brushed my cheek. The scent of her perfume still clung faintly to his collar. It didn't sting anymore. It just told me I was still winning. He walked out the door, confident, oblivious. I sat down at the table and opened my notebook. There were patterns to be drawn, timelines to connect. I traced every line of his deceit until the picture became clear. His empire built on arrogance, balanced on the assumption that I would remain invisible. He was right about one thing. No one sees me anymore. That, I thought, is what makes me dangerous. They say revenge is sweet. They're wrong. It's clinical, methodical. It has no flavor, only texture. By the time the plan was ready, I had rehearsed every step until it felt like muscle memory. Months of quiet observation had made me an expert in his habits. The drawer he thought I never opened, the key he hid beneath the cufflink box, the way he refilled his private bottle of massage oil, after every tryst disguised as a business trip. He thought he was discreet. Men like him always do. It wasn't the affair that broke me. It was the paperwork, the new will, the missing accounts, the quiet betrayal written in black ink and notarized. The scent of her perfume might have faded, but the ink remained, his signature a confession that no one else would ever read. Until I decided they would. I didn't want him dead. Death was too merciful, too fast. What I wanted was exposure, the kind that stripped him bare, forced him to look in a mirror without the buffer of charm or wealth. So I chose something symbolic, something fitting. Glue. Not any glue, the industrial kind. Transparent, odorless, permanent. I bought it at a hardware store 2 towns over, paying cash. The man at the counter asked if I was fixing something. Yes, I said. Something that broke a long time ago. He smiled, unaware of the truth he just nodded to. That night I prepared. Every motion slow, deliberate. Gloves. Light off. Door locked. He was out of course with her. His predictable absence was a blessing. I stood before his vanity drawer, the one he thought I never touched. I lifted the bottle, felt the slick coolness of it, the faint trace of the perfume she wore. My reflection in the mirror looked calm, almost detached. A surgeon before incision. I poured half of it down the sink, replaced it with the glue, and shook the bottle gently. It mixed beautifully, indistinguishable. It wasn't fury that guided me. It was precision. When I placed it back exactly where it belonged, I felt nothing. No tremor of guilt, no spark of satisfaction. Just equilibrium. I wasn't a woman seeking vengeance. I was restoring balance. The next morning, I went about my day. I made breakfast, read the paper, trimmed the roses. He left as usual, humming off-key, believing the world was still his to manipulate. I watched from the window, tea in hand, as his car pulled away. Invisibility still suited me. But today, it felt less like armor and more like power. That evening, he came home early. I heard him on the phone in his office, low, laughing. Then silence. Then the sound of the front door opening again. His cologne lingered briefly in the hallway before fading. He didn't return that night. At 2:13 a.m., the phone rang. The kind of ring that doesn't belong in sleep. I knew before I answered. A man's voice, formal, nervous. Mrs. Alden? I'm calling from County General. There's been an incident. I listened without interruption. The words washed over me in clinical order. Accident, emergency room, adhesive bonding, critical embarrassment. He wasn't dead. Not even close. Just stuck. Literally. To her. The nurse didn't say it outright, but her tone carried the weight of disbelief barely contained by professionalism. 2 people, fused together at the most compromising point of anatomy. Firefighters. Paramedics. A scene of biblical irony. I thanked her for calling. Hung up. Sat still. Then I laughed, quietly, carefully, until the tears came. Not tears of joy or sorrow, but something in between. Tears born of finality. It wasn't cruelty. It was consequence. The next morning, the news had spread. A prominent businessman hospitalized after a domestic mishap. Anonymous sources confirming a private entanglement gone wrong. No names at first. But names always find their way into daylight. By noon, his phone was ringing nonstop. Journalists, board members, lawyers. I let it ring. I let them wonder why his wife wasn't at the hospital, why she hadn't been seen. Because I wasn't hiding anymore. Instead, I was at my attorney's office, sliding a folder across the desk. Everything you need, I said. Receipts, bank statements, copies of the will, photos from the gala. The evidence of both infidelity and fraud, cataloged neatly by a woman who'd learned how to make invisibility work for her. My lawyer, a sharp woman with tired eyes, blinked once, then twice. You've been busy. I've been patient, I corrected. When I left her office, the sky was gray and heavy with rain. It smelled like endings. By the time I returned home, the headlines had shifted tone. Photos, names, the kind of public scandal that no amount of money could suffocate. Local businessman and socialite hospitalized after private accident. Wife declines to comment. I brewed tea. Jasmine, my favorite. The scent filled the kitchen like calm revenge. Outside, thunder rolled. Inside, my phone buzzed again, his name flashing across the screen. I watched it for a long moment, then turned it face down. Let it ring. Let it scream. Because somewhere in that hospital bed, surrounded by reporters and flashing lights, he was learning what it felt like to be trapped. Not metaphorically, not emotionally, physically, bound to the woman he ruined everything for. The irony wasn't lost on me. Life has a way of sculpting poetry out of cruelty. I didn't visit him, not once, but I did send flowers to the hospital, addressed to both of them. White lilies, clean and sharp. The card read, "For the happy couple, may you never come apart." No signature, none needed. That evening, I sat by the window, tea cooling between my palms. I felt no triumph, only peace. A quiet, heavy peace that comes when justice finally takes shape in the world, however grotesquely. When the news anchor said his company's shares were plummeting, I didn't flinch. When they showed footage of his mistress leaving the hospital in tears, I didn't smile. Because victory isn't loud. It doesn't dance or shout. It simply settles. And that night, when I turned off the lights, I realized something strange, something almost sacred. He'd built his empire on binding contracts. Promises that trapped people. Paperwork that enslaved. In the end, he was the one who couldn't move. Justice, I thought, doesn't always wear robes or wield a gavel. Sometimes, it smells faintly of glue and jasmine tea. Freedom doesn't arrive with fireworks. It slips in quietly, like sunlight through thin curtains. You almost don't notice it until it warms your skin. The scandal had burned through the news cycle in less than a week. Photographers outside the hospital, reporters stationed at the gates, endless speculation about what exactly had bonded them together. I didn't watch the coverage. I didn't have to. People told me, called me, texted me, half with pity, half with awe. My favorite message came from an old friend I hadn't seen in years. "You always were the calmest hurricane." I smiled when I read it. Calm. Yes, that's what survival becomes after a while. Stillness shaped by exhaustion. By the second week, the lawyers had assembled. Men in press suits and expensive watches, their words coded in apology and opportunism. They came to my home, each one careful not to look too long at me, as if guilt could be contagious. My own lawyer, Ms. Graves, sat beside me sharp, composed. Every sentence she spoke a needle threading through legal armor. "You don't owe him forgiveness," she said plainly. "Just signatures." So I signed. The divorce papers first, neat black ink, my name written as if it had waited decades to reclaim itself. Then the settlement. The accounts I'd traced, now frozen. The properties, half in my name, half under dispute. He didn't appear in person. Of course not. Pride is a coward. He sent his lawyer instead, who cleared his throat and read from a statement of regret. I didn't listen. I just stared at the paper in front of me, my signature curving across the line like a vein filled with quiet rage. When it was done, Miss Graves reached over, touched my wrist lightly. "It's over." But it wasn't. Not yet. Because endings aren't clean. They bleed backward. That night, the house felt emptier than I expected. Every object had a memory attached, A ghost of laughter, a whisper of routine. Even the silence sounded shaped by him. But beneath it all, something new was growing. A hum, a pulse, my own. I made tea, as always. Jasmine again. The scent was softer now, not a weapon, but a comfort. I sat at the table and spread out the papers, divorce decree, settlement confirmation, media releases. Words upon words confirming what my body already knew. I was free. And yet, I wasn't sure what to do with all that space inside me. For 40 years, I'd been Mrs. Alden. A title polished and displayed, but never truly mine. I'd built my identity around someone else's ambition, tended to his image as if it were a garden. Now there was only me. My name felt strange in my mouth, like a forgotten song remembered halfway through. Margaret Alden. No, Margaret Hale. That was who I'd been before the ring, before the vows that turned into barbed wire. I whispered it into the room. It sounded tentative at first, fragile. Then again, louder. Margaret Hale. It echoed softly, brushing against the walls like wind through an old house. For the first time in years, I didn't flinch at the sound. In the days that followed, I began dismantling the life he'd built around me. Little by little, the framed photos came down. The tailored curtains, his choice, were replaced with sheer linen that let light in. The study, once his kingdom, became mine. I painted the walls pale blue, the color of air, not authority. While I worked, the phone rang endlessly. Tabloid offers, book deals, interviews. Everyone wanted the story. Tell your side, they said. Take back the narrative. But I'd already taken it back in silence. Words could only cheapen it now. When one persistent journalist arrived at my gate, I met him there myself. He was young, overeager, holding a recorder like a weapon. Mrs. Alden, he began, can we get your thoughts on... It's Hale, I interrupted softly. Margaret Hale. He blinked, thrown off balance. Of course. Miss Hale. Do you feel vindicated by what happened? I considered that. The question was too simple for the complexity it deserved. Vindicated? No. The word implied victory. What I felt was release. Let's just say, I told him, he finally learned that not every bond is meant to be broken. I closed the gate. He left eventually. That night, I attended a small gathering at my friend Claire's house. Women I'd known for years but had kept at arm's length. The kind of women who understood endurance, who'd survived their own quiet wars. They didn't ask for details. They didn't need them. They just poured wine, lit candles, and spoke in soft laughter that didn't demand anything from me. At some point, someone said, "You look lighter." I touched my face, startled. "Do I?" "You do," Claire said. "Like you've remembered something important." I smiled. I think I did. The next morning, I woke before dawn. The house was still, washed in blue-gray light. I opened the window and let the air in. The world smelled different now, wet earth, faint jasmine, freedom. On my desk sat a letter addressed to me from his legal team. Final transfer of assets, an apology folded into paperwork. I didn't open it. Instead, I slid it into a drawer, beneath a note I'd written weeks ago. He doesn't deserve your ruin. I wasn't ruined. I was rebuilt. Later that day, I drove to the coast. The same one we'd visited every summer, back when marriage still felt like partnership. The tide was low, the sand cool beneath my shoes. I walked until the wind tangled my hair and the horizon looked like a promise. I carried no resentment, only understanding. Some monsters wear wedding rings. Some prisons have chandeliers. But liberation isn't fire, it's breath. Quiet, steady, necessary. When I reached the water's edge, I took off my shoes and stepped in. The waves touched my ankles like forgiveness. I whispered my name again, not to reclaim it, but to test how it sounded against the world. Margaret Hale. The sea didn't answer. It didn't need to, because I already knew. The silence was no longer empty. It was mine. When I turned back toward the shore, the wind caught my voice and carried it somewhere far beyond my reach. Past gossip, past regret, past everything that used to hold me. And for the first time in a very long time, I didn't whisper. I spoke,